Well, it's just going to be you at first. So
Okay.
you're live. Go.
All right. Hey there, lifter uppers. Gotta love Mondays, right? I'm Deb Krier, the co host of Cancer and Comedy, where our mission is to heal cancer impacted people through hope and humor, something we like to call turning the grim into a grin. Well, today we're going to have a fascinating conversation on cancer and comedy because we're going to be talking about overcoming chronic pain and PTSD to have a career as a writer and a publisher with a smile as we talk with Lynn Elikqitie Smargis from writeforyou.me. Well, now here is the host of our Cancer and Comedy podcast, Dr. Brad Miller.
Hey, Deb. It's great to be with you and all of our lifter uppers, the people who follow cancer and comedy. We love to be with you to share life together. When whatever you're facing, cancer is one of those things that kind of eats us alive, and that can be all kinds of things, not just physical cancer. It can be emotional issues, it can be marital stuff, it can be mental health type of things. But we like to kind of focus in here about how people that have taken whatever life has thrown at them kind of a bad thing and kind of turn it around to be something better in life. I mean, we like to crawl and we like to have a dash of humor with that. So we like to call that kind of transforming your life with hope and humor. And so we like to develop our community here at cancercomedy.com. So we really would like for people to join us in this kind of mission that we have here to help to heal the world with hope and humor. And so if people would like to, we'd really like for you to join us in our community at cancercomedy.com/follow and be a part of what we are about because we like to have some fun together. And Deb, one of the things I like to do is tell a dumb dad joke. Are you ready for one
I
today?
am ready. You know, I wait anxiously for
Oh,
these.
I know. Do you know, in my, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I used to have a fear of hurdles. But,
Hurdles?
I used to have a fear of hurdles, but I got over it. I got over it. So,
Cute. Cute.
what? Just one more here. Yesterday, I had the weird experience. A clown held the door open for me. It was a nice gesture.
Cute. I love it. I love it. You know, I live for your bad dad jokes of the
Oh
day.
well, you're the one. You're the one. Okay.
It's me, just me all by myself. But as you mentioned, we would love for you to be part of our cancer and comedy community, where together we crush cancer with a message of how to cope with hope and humor. Please follow Cancer and Comedy at cancerandcomedy.com/follow.
Well, today, Deb, I'm just thrilled here on our live presentation to have a great guest with us here today, who I've got to know her at Podfest. I think you met her at
Mhm.
Podfest
Yep.
year or so ago. And here is what I notice about people sometimes. I notice the vibe I get from people.
Right.
And if there's
Mhm.
energy there, if there's a smile there, if there's a little bit of lift in the voice, that's the kind of thing that gets my attention. That's what got my attention with you,
Mhm.
Deb, for instance, some energy and some life. And so I was able to have a get together and meet an incredible woman by the name of Lynn Elikqitie Smargis at Podfest, and we struck up a conversation and found out that she's got some things in life that she's had to overcome and deal with, but she still
Mhm.
has a
Mhm.
great smile on her face and a great attitude about her. And so she's our guest today. So Lynn, thank you for being with us here uh, today on our conversation.
And there she is with that great smile.
I'm trying to get her in the middle of my screen here. So,
Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to chat on your show today.
well, that is fantastic. I'm going to get Deb in here too and get me on the. That is
He's
both. So
rearranging us.
there we go. There.
There we go. There we
I just
go.
want Lynn to be the center of attention here for a little bit
That's
and
it.
our
Mhm.
on our screen
Like
and for
people
people.
Jenga.
It's a
There
it's
you
a
go.
cancer and comedy smammage.
Smash it. There
It's
you
like
go.
which person is under which shell. It's like the shell game.
Yeah, that's
There
it.
you go.
Doo-doo.
There, there you go. There you
Okay,
go.
we're not
Lynn,
gonna have any fun. I can tell that already.
I know it's a terrible, terrible thing. But hey, Lynn, thanks for being with us. And
Yeah.
you have just an incredible story. You are a publisher, an author, a ghostwriter, things like that. But you've had some challenges in your life, and what I've found about you is you got an incredible story to tell about how life has happened to you and how you've kind of chosen not to let life dominate you, or let circumstances dominate you, but to kind of take some control of your life. So why don't you just share with us just a bit about your story, Lynn, and then Deb and I will jump in here. A little bit about your story of kind of some of the challenges you faced and where you're at now.
Yeah, so the one we're focusing on today is the PTSD and the chronic pain, and so they're actually intermingled. But before we get into that part, I wanted to just talk about just basically growing up. I had a very abusive mother from the age of 2, so she started like physically, emotionally abusing me, and then she also sexually abused me at age 5. And so being abused at that young an age, especially that type of abuse, it really just rips your soul apart.
Mhm.
You always feel unsafe. You don't know where to go to feel security. Like I didn't know who to talk to about it, or if I should talk about it. And you're so young at that point. Your brain's not really developed to handle trauma like that. So I ended up developing PTSD, and specifically complex PTSD, but we'll just say PTSD because a lot of people know that term.
Mhm.
And from the abuse, and it's not just from being abused one time; it's from being abused multiple times over a very long period of time, until basically, I mean, out of the house. I tried to move out of the house as fast as possible. So, but I ended up getting into an abusive relationship because that was the pattern that I had, and I didn't realize the amount of the abuse that I had experienced until about 10 years ago, when more of my memories started coming back, and then I really had a lot more PTSD symptoms come in because your brain is very good at protecting yourself and keeping yourself safe. So even though I was in that abusive environment, my brain was literally packing away memories in what I call these boxes. And so because it's very hard to live and function if you're constantly dealing with all the trauma. So your brain does a very good job of packing those things away and opening them up at a later time in your life when you do feel safe. And so that's exactly what happened to me and a lot of other people with PTSD. That's very common, that your brain just kind of pushes it aside for the moment when you're a kid because you don't have the emotional capacity to deal with that or the maturity to deal with that. And so as an adult, my brain just decided one day to unpack all these things and be like, here's the gamut of things you have experienced as a child. And I had to deal with that. And that came along with literally having these, I call them emotional seizures, where basically I would be perfectly fine 1 minute, and the next minute I would be on the floor shaking. I couldn't respond to anybody. I was just, and it would be anywhere from like 10 minutes to an hour at first. And at first it was like almost every day. And then as I found a good psychologist to help me deal with the PTSD, it was like it happened less often. And now that really doesn't happen anymore. So, but it's a process, and it's taken years and a lot of therapy, and a therapy with a psychologist. I would say if you have PTSD or a chronic trauma in your life, like what we call big T trauma. So there's big T trauma, that is the chronic trauma that stays with you your whole life, that you have to learn how to deal with and have tools to deal with. And then there's little T traumas. So Neil deGrasse Tyson actually gave a really good example of this on his podcast. He lived in New York City during 9/11, and the day of 9/11, there were a lot of police sirens and ambulance noises and things like that. And so for 9 months afterward, every time he heard one, he would tense up, and then he would relax because he realized, oh, it's not 9/11. And after 9 months, that went away. So that's what's called acute trauma, where you have experienced trauma, but it has not physically rewired your brain. With PTSD or complex PTSD, it actually physically rewires your brain. So your brain is biologically not the same, and you can't ever get it back 100%. You need to learn tools how to deal with it, and you need to learn how to release trauma, and you can't release it all at once. I see these people come on like different commercials of like, oh, you can release your trauma in a week. I'm like, no, that's impossible, because first of all, your brain's not going to let that happen, because it feels like it needs to protect itself. And second of all, if you try to release all that trauma in a week, you would literally be in bed. You would not be able to function, period. Like, it would be so overwhelming for you to release and try to deal with all of that heavy trauma at once. So I have learned tools I equip myself with tools and have learned different things on like what to do, what not to do, like how to work through the trauma in little pieces so that it's not so overwhelming. Not that it's not hard, it's still hard. It's just not so overwhelming that I can't function. So you have to learn what that is right for you, because my experience and what I do could, obviously is good for me, but other people experience it differently. And so you can't judge people saying like, oh, well, that person hasn't been to war, so it's not real trauma, which isn't true. If you have trauma, if you legitimately have PTSD, it doesn't matter if it's from war, child abuse, like any other type of experience, you have PTSD. You either have it or you do not. So that's one of the things that a lot of people, as a common misnomer, it's like, oh, it's only real PTSD if you're a war veteran, but that's not true. You can have PTSD from many other different experiences too. It depends on two things. One is the length and rapidity of the thing that happened to you. So if it's something that happened to you over time, over and over again, that sets you up for PTSD. Or if it's something that is a very big trauma that's happened in a short period of time too. And there's other things as well. Like, and I'm not a psychologist and I don't play one on my podcast, but that's just kind of one of the things that is a very big misnomer, that you had to have gone to war and seen war things to have actual PTSD, which is not true. So there's a lot of us out there who have PTSD from childhood abuse and from other different types of scenarios that we grew up in. And it's much easier to get PTSD before the age of 25, because around the age of 25, of course, it's not exactly on your 25th birthday because we're all so different. But around the age of 25, your brain matures to the point where you can handle more trauma and more heavier emotional things and situations. And so you're much less likely to get PTSD at the age of 25. And it's also perspective too, right? Like two people can go through the same experience and one can be traumatized and one might not be traumatized. Like at this point, I've dealt with so much trauma. I know what it feels like, and I know how to emotionally separate myself from it. So at this point, I'm much less likely to be traumatized because of what I've been practicing and the skill set that I have now. So I'm more aware of it. And I'm also, it's an ever going battle. I practice every day. Yesterday, I was sitting and journaling for 4 hours, like still releasing more things that I have to release. So it's not, I don't feel like I'm ever going to get over it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, first of all. And I just want to say, I just feel with you a little bit about the trauma. Everybody has trauma to some degree, but not everybody has PTSD in the sense of that big T trauma that you mentioned there. And you mentioned at least two things that I want you to go just a little bit deeper with us on here, Lynn, and that is the box metaphor. I'm interested in that. You mentioned that, and then tools. You've said you've gained some tools to help you deal with PTSD. The main focus here we're talking about here, and your chronic pain, some other things. Boxes, metaphors, and tools. Can you go with me there on those things?
Yeah. So one of the things I realized when I started working with my psychologist when I first found out I had PTSD is that I would put all of my bad memories in these boxes and I would store them in these warehouses, which I pictured in my head, which I didn't know I had until I started working on all of this. And that was my brain's way of, protecting me and keeping me safe so I didn't have to deal with that trauma as a child. But as an adult, and I started opening up these boxes, I would literally picture myself going into a warehouse, opening up a box, and we usually have something black or dark inside it, and letting that go, and then putting that box over the side of, I pictured these warehouses on a big cliff. And so I would throw the box over this cliff and eventually burn the pile of boxes. And so I had this process where I would take things out and deal with them a few boxes at a time until I got to the point where I had emptied all the warehouses. And so that was one of my specific visualizations I used for myself to help me deal with all of those things that my brain had put aside. And some other tools that I use with my PTSD is like, one is if I know I'm having a really bad day, I just call people on my calendar and say, look, like I have a migraine or whatever, right? And I can't meet today because I know that there's certain days I was just not able to function. Those are pretty rare right now. Like usually if I'm not able to function, it's more something physical, but it used to be I would not be able to function like maybe for a whole day. And on the days that are hard, I don't get many of them anymore because now at this point I've been working on it for almost 10 years. So I rarely get a day where I'm really stuck. It does happen sometimes. So when I do get a day where I'm more stuck, I have certain supplements I take with this supplement called Huperzine A that I notice is really good for anxiety. And for me, it really helps me. And there's also been some studies shown, interestingly enough, that Huperzine A may have some promise for like helping with dementia prevention. And one of the interesting things is people that have PTSD are more likely to have dementia later in life. It's one of those things like, and also if you have lack of hearing and some other different things, diabetes sets you up for being a candidate for dementia. And so that's another kind of reason why I want to get all this stuff kind of sorted out, because I definitely don't, that's not how I want to end my life. So
Well,
like one of the tools.
let's hit the pause there. You want to sort it out so you don't want to end your life there, because that's a part of the theme we
Yes.
work on here at Cancer and Comedy. It's about how cancer, those things that can eat you alive, whether it's PTSD or something else. But we want to live. We want to live to the
Right.
fullest, to the end of our life, our physical life, whatever that is. But we want to live to the fullest. But handling trauma, handling the drama that comes with that, and other, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, is a part of that process. And so, Deb, I'd like you to jump in here, if you will, in the
Mhm.
sense of you've had your own share of trauma and
Mhm.
drama to deal with as well. Are you relating at all to what Lynn is sharing here? Tell me
I
more.
I am to a very minor degree, because what you went through is absolutely incredible. When I was first diagnosed and went through my very first cancer treatment, my first chemo, I ended up in septic shock. This far from dying. I mean, the doctors were arguing about how fast it was going to be, and then I was in the hospital for 7 weeks. And so my brain started compartmentalizing things, to deal with all of that, right? And a big part of that was the pain. People ask me, did it hurt? Well, I'm pretty sure it did, right? And I do remember bits and pieces of it. But it's funny because there are things where I am almost 10 years out from that. Something will bring it back just like that,
Mhm.
right? And I love that you talk about the fact that it's not poof, it's all gone, it's all better. Because that trauma is always there. And I tell people it's like, you might have been told, hey, your cancer is gone, but that shadow is always there behind us. And we're always
Yes.
kind of waiting for it to come back and pounce on us. But we can take steps to hopefully make sure that as you've been doing, to make sure that it hopefully doesn't come back. Or if it does, how are we going to deal with it? Maybe we've been healthier, maybe, we've been going to the doctor more, whatever, all of those various things. But I think, it's exactly as you said. So many people assume that trauma is the big T, but there's lots of trauma that we go through, and we have to give ourselves the grace to feel that and go through it rather than push it away. And I think that's, I mean, I can't imagine being a child and going through what you went through. I would guess part of it was you didn't even know that wasn't normal, right? Because you were so young that it was, almost like, well, doesn't everybody have this happen to them? And then to realize no, and then to realize that it was your mother who was
Mhm.
doing this. I mean, that's just gonna, always, bring up those things, um, and all of the feelings that are associated with that.
Yeah, well, I did know actually at the age of 5, I knew this was not right. Like I
Mhm,
knew the way she was treating me was not
mhm,
normal
mhm.
because I never heard any of my friends talking about it.
Right.
So,
Mhm,
and I could feel like this is not okay, right?
mhm.
Like as a kid, you
Yeah,
know
you
what's right and
feel
what's
that.
wrong,
Mhm, mhm,
right? Yeah, and like you said with trauma, Deb, like it's always there.
mhm,
And so one of the, I just picked up this awesome book. It's called Mind Your Body, and it's from Lori. I think her last name is Sparks. I can't remember. Her first name is Lori. Anyway, she talks about that fear and how living in that fear, if you don't let it go and you're
mhm,
constantly thinking about what's
mhm,
going to happen to me next,
mhm,
can actually make your physical pains in your
mhm,
body worse.
mhm.
So it's
Right.
that mind body connection, right? Your
Mhm,
trauma response, your physical trauma response.
mhm,
And so that's one of the things I'm working on
mhm,
now because I feel like a lot of my chronic
mhm,
pain, like it does have a basis. I do have
mhm,
autoimmune and some other things, but I
mhm,
feel
mhm,
like my PTSD definitely makes it worse.
mhm.
And because I
Right.
can tell, because when I'm feeling not good in my head, my body feels worse, which
Mhm,
makes
mhm.
sense, right? Because like when we're all tense and you get a stress headache, it's a stress
Right,
headache.
right.
Yeah.
And then
And so
your
just
digestion is off and all of that.
right.
Mhm,
But it all is a choice. And that's what a lot of people
mhm,
don't realize. Some people who have been through trauma say, like, oh, I can't do that. It's like, okay, but
mhm,
you're choosing not to deal with it
mhm.
because it
Right.
is scary and it is
Mhm,
hard and it's
mhm,
not pleasant. But
mhm,
my choice was based on, do I want to live the rest of my life being a victim
mhm,
and a prisoner to what my mom
mhm,
did to me? Or
mhm,
do I want to live the rest of my life as myself and
mhm,
take off all those
mhm,
layers that she had placed on me
mhm,
so that I can be my best
mhm,
self? And so I chose the latter because I did
mhm,
not want to be the victim for the rest of my life.
mhm,
And some people don't choose that. And I
Right.
understand why, because
Mhm.
I've been through the work. But I
Mhm.
will say it is way better to do the work and come out on the other
Mhm.
side
Mhm.
and feel like you have that freedom than to
Mhm.
be stuck in those loops. Because
Mhm.
now when I go back and see, I can see it in other people. I can see behaviors in other
Mhm.
people that I used to do. And it might not be the
Mhm.
exact behavior, but I'm like, I used to do that because of blah, blah, blah. And I used to do that because
Mhm.
of blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So I can see that behavior in other people. And it's a choice. It really is a choice. So like, are you going to decide to move forward in life with these
Mhm.
things, or are you going to
Mhm.
decide to work on yourself so that as
Mhm.
you move forward in life, you can be
Mhm.
feel more fulfilled and feel that you have that freedom?
Mhm.
Well, then let's talk
Right.
then a little bit about the choices you have made then, because you chose, and both myself as a former pastor, I know Deb has his experience too, where we've seen people who have spiraled down and they have ended up they've
Mhm.
lost, they've
Mhm.
chosen a spiraling situation of demise.
Mhm.
And you've chosen something different. You've chosen a life of, you mentioned earlier how you sit down and journal for 4 hours, things like that. You've
Mhm.
chosen life as a writer, a ghostwriter, publisher. Kind of, is this a part of the process that you work through now to kind of give yourself some choices that give you more purpose and direction in life? Or tell us a little bit about how that evolved for you.
Yeah, so basically I had to make the choice like to go to a psychologist to do that work. Also one of the choices I make during the day is like sometimes if I have a hard day, and oh, actually to refer back to what you said, Deb, is like all of a sudden something pops up in your head and you're like, "Oh my
Mhm.
gosh." And I try to do one of the tools I use is I try to avoid, like if I know it's a bad, like a horror movie, right? That it has torture
Mhm.
scenes in it. I
Right.
can't even listen to
Yeah, you
torture
just
scenes. So
can't
I
don't
avoid
watch
all
it.
those things.
Mhm.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Like if I
Mhm.
know something's going to trigger me, I try to avoid it. But like you
Mhm.
said, Deb, there's things like you could be walking in a beautiful park and all of a
Mhm.
sudden your mind's like, hey, right now's a
Mhm.
good time that we're going to
Hello.
have this
Mhm.
memory pop
Mhm.
up. And
Mhm.
I call that pulling the rug out from underneath you because it's
Mhm.
completely unexpected and it just sidelines you. So in
Mhm.
that case, I now have to stop and I have to like just sit down wherever I'm at
Mhm.
and just wait and think about, okay, and acknowledge it. Say like,
Mhm.
okay,
Right.
I know this
Mhm.
is here.
Mhm.
I know this is scary, but like either I'm going to deal with it at that minute and I can just process it out,
Mhm.
or I'm going to say I acknowledge it. And what I
Mhm.
do is I actually picture myself on a bench and picture whatever the issue is sitting on
Mhm.
a bench next to me. I'm like, I would like you to sit here and I'm
Mhm.
going to deal with you later,
Mhm.
and talk to it as if it's a
Mhm.
person,
Mhm.
because that helps me deal with it without being over
Mhm.
emotional. Because if
Mhm.
I know if I get emotionally entangled
Mhm.
in whatever that is sitting next to me, it's going to emotionally
Mhm.
and physically drain me,
Mhm.
and I do not want that to happen.
Right.
I want to deal
Mhm.
with this on my own terms,
Mhm.
not on the memory's terms.
Mhm. Right.
Hmm.
And of course, ignoring something is the worst that we
Is
can do.
worse. Yeah.
It's totally understandable, right? Because we don't wanna
It's
deal with
gonna sit
whatever
there
that
and
is.
grow.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Ignoring it is
Right.
like planting a
Mhm.
seed and expecting it not to grow.
Yes.
Like I'm gonna plant the
And
seed in
what
this
does
fertile
is it
soil.
actually does grow. Mhm. Mhm.
Right. Yeah, because every experience you have currently in present
Mhm.
is going to feed that seed in that soil.
Right.
It's going to water it, fertilize it, and it's going
Mhm.
to grow. And then you're going to explode and it's going to become something horribly
Mhm.
big that you have to deal with later on that's going to be worse. So you're
Mhm.
better off dealing with it when you notice it.
Mhm.
And that's also part of it too, is knowing to be aware of it, right? If
Mhm.
you're not even aware of what you're doing, which I wasn't for
Mhm.
years because I didn't understand what was going on.
Right. Mhm.
If you're not even aware of it, you can't take it on.
Mhm.
You can't say, hey, I'm going to tackle this problem, or I'm
Mhm.
going to, work through this. So the first thing is to be aware. And that's where a good
Mhm.
psychologist or a good
Mhm.
professional mental health provider
Mhm.
comes in, is to look at you from the outside and be like,
Right.
hey, are you aware of
Mhm.
XYZ?
Mhm. Right. And one of the things, and I tell people, we often think, oh, we can't, we shouldn't, it's bad to ask for help. And I tell people sometimes it is the strongest thing you can do is to ask for help. And whether that's with a mental health therapist, pastor, whoever it is, maybe it's just your best friend or you're talking to your cat, right? But it is very empowering. It is the strongest thing we can do to admit, hey, we need help.
Yeah.
Well, none of us got here without help.
Right.
I mean,
Mhm.
you can't go through life without having help, whether
Mhm.
you know it or not. Like there has
Mhm.
been like everything we use has been put together by
Mhm.
other people, right?
Right.
So like our
Mhm.
computers, our
Mhm.
kitchen cabinets, or
Mhm.
whatever. So I mean, if you say, "Hey, I don't need help from anybody," then you
Mhm.
have to get rid of everything you've ever owned
Right.
because someone else
Mhm.
already made
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Well, that's all awesome. And then the choices we make to get help and then to do something with value
Mhm.
in our life that can be
Mhm.
helpful to other people. And I
Mhm.
think it's part of what you're doing here now. And I've been, Lynn, and you, you help, you've crafted your own story here in many ways. And then you also help other people craft their stories. What do you, and that means you're dealing with human emotions. So, and
Mhm.
you've mentioned already about how you kind of have to compartmentalize or put in boxes some things and some things of this. But as you work with people as a ghostwriter and other things like that, helping them craft their emotions, how do you kind of navigate that, protect your own emotions, or how do you help them to
Mhm.
draw out their emotions? You see
Oh,
when I'm going with this?
Mhm.
How do you,
mhm.
You should read
because
nonfiction.
your
Mhm.
story is so intense
Mhm.
that you mentioned how some things can trigger, but you're working with people to tell their
Mhm.
stories. So just go with me through that there for just a minute about crafting stories with emotional boundaries and navigating that type of thing.
Yeah, well, just writing a book in and of itself is very emotional for people, right?
Mhm.
Because they're pouring their heart and soul into it.
Mhm.
So just off the bat, people are very emotional about it, and I
Mhm.
understand that because I've written my own books. But
Mhm.
as a writer, I'm much less emotionally connected to my books because most of my
Mhm.
books are just kind of generally self-help nonfiction, and
Mhm.
they're not bad. It's just that I know this is a work I'm putting out into the world. It may or may
Mhm.
not be accepted, and
Mhm.
I'm okay with that. But
Right.
that's me. Everybody's not there. And so
Mhm.
I know a lot of my clients are new to writing books. They're new, they
Mhm.
have never been an author.
Mhm.
So they have not gone through the process. So my job, most of my job is book coaching. I walk
Mhm.
people through the self-publishing process and help them like overcome imposter syndrome
Mhm.
or help them overcome their fears about book publishing, give them realistic expectations, be like, this is typically what happens. If more happens, that's awesome, but this is typically what you're going to expect. And then just walking them through the process and helping them get their book published and on Amazon and having an actual physical copy in their hand. So I remember the first time I did that with my book over 5 years ago, and it was so exciting, and I cried, and I was just very overwhelmed with joy because I was so excited I published my first book. So that's the first aspect of emotional, bringing the emotional component into publishing. The second one is writing memoirs, right? Because right now I'm writing two
Mm.
memoirs for two different people, another person who also has PTSD, so I can relate to that. But just really trying to capture people's voice when I'm writing their book because everybody's voice is so different, and not changing it, like making it very professionally written, but professionally
Mhm.
written in their voice so that when
Right.
people read it and they talk to them, there's not a discrepancy. Be like, that doesn't
Mhm.
sound like the person that's in the book.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's another thing. And yes, my clients do get very emotional, especially my one I'm writing a memoir for right now, because he's very excited and he wants to, get his book out and all that stuff, which I totally understand. One of the things I have to tell people is they're like, I want to put this book in my book and this in my book and this. I'm like, okay, you sit down and do an outline, right? Like, let's back up and let's use the tools. And then what I tell people is, if you have an idea that's not in your outline, we can write it down and possibly put it somewhere else. But people do get overwhelmed, being like, what should I put in my book? Right? Should I put this in my book? Should I put that in my book? Like, what? And I tell people, you need to know what the focus of your book is and what the
Mhm.
purpose is, and you have to, everything that you put in your book has to be put in with that intention. Now, is everything you originally put in your book going to be in the finished work? No, because we go through and edit it, and sometimes people add stuff or take stuff away. But just really trying to keep people focused and their eye on the ball, and their eye on the goal, so to speak, of like, what is the purpose of this book, and make sure all the content that is in it like backs that purpose and doesn't go off on sidetrack. I mean, and too much. Like, right, you're gonna have a story that sidetracks a little, and that's fine. But you don't want to go so sidetracked. People
Mhm.
are like, okay, what is this book about? Right? So
Yeah,
so that's
Right.
I
part of
think
my job,
Mhm.
is to keep
you
people on track.
you
Mhm.
mentioned purpose there, and I think it's so important for all of us to have a purpose. But there's a difference between have a purpose that is helpful than kind of just regurgitating, just I sometimes call it bleeding all over the place when we need to process and get stuff out, and that's for a therapist or that's for
Mhm.
something else in that kind of a way. In order for us to be helpful to other people, we have to have some focus and some purpose. We need to interject our emotions and things of that nature. But I love the way you can help people to craft to do that. And I want to ask about some specific aspect of this that I think may be helpful to our audience here. I know you, as I mentioned in our introduction, you're an energetic person with just a very beautiful vibe about you, and
Thank you.
that just shows some joy in your life. So, what role do you think choosing to have some humor in life, or choosing to see some things on a positive side. What role does that play, both in some transformation in your own life, but also how you may help others process their story? And we're talking here about, what role does humor or having a brighter outlook have in all this?
Yeah. No, I love that you asked that, Brad, because that's so important. One of the things, another tool in my toolkit that I also help is being Buddhist, because Buddhism, if some people think of it as a religion, and it actually isn't, because there's no deity that you worship, but really it's a set of life principles to go by that help you deal with the emotional stressors of everyday life. And it doesn't matter if it was 2000 years ago or today, those principles still apply. So one of them is basically like, with ruminating, like don't ruminate and think about things over and over again, because it makes you, it basically, it's in Buddhism, I can't remember the term for it, but basically what it means is it brings you down emotionally, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm,
like I can say, hey, this happened to me. Yes, it was bad, but I'm not going to sit here and think about it every day. I'm going to live my life in the present, and I'm going to live that as I choose, right? And so that's where the humor and comedy and things like that come in, is like, I'm choosing to live in the present. I'm choosing not to live with the stress of whatever it is, and we can do that on a daily basis, right? Like you hit your toe on something and it hurts, you can sit the rest of the day thinking, man, this day was horrible because I hit my toe on the bed, and the rest of the day it just hurt. Or you can think, wow, that really hurt, I'm going to move on with my day, I have these things planned, and it's really great. It's really your mindset and your perspective and your outlook that got you to where you're going in the day, and that also is a choice, and that also can make your life great. It can make your life good. It can make your life so-so, or it can make your life feel horrible, depending on how you frame it in your own
mhm.
head. Like, we are our worst own enemies, right? So depending on how you frame whatever it is that's going on in your head, makes your day how it is. And
Mm.
of course, there
Mhm.
are things that can make it worse and can make it more challenging and can make it feel bad. And it is okay to feel bad when things go wrong, but you don't want to hold on to that feeling, because that only eats away at you.
Yeah.
So having that joy and that comedy
Mhm,
relief helps to deal with those things that aren't so great during your
mhm.
day.
Yeah, you
Right.
got that weight from the past. If you let it, it'll just weight you down. You make a
Mhm.
choice here in the
Right.
present. I know. Hey, I stubbed my toe the other day. I had to go to the hospital on a tow truck, so it was kind of bad that way. So sorry,
I
S-
love the dad jokes. I'm one
sorry.
of the few people who appreciate dad
Those
jokes, so I
those
appreciate
bad
it.
dad
I'm
jokes
just
just sneak
sorry.
in.
Sometimes they're
Mhm.
just there. They just gotta come out. So,
That's
but
cool. I feel like I appreciate it though. I for some reason I just find this completely funny.
I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Well, you're the one. You and Deb are the two. There we go. But Deb, what's your thoughts about this? About choosing to kind of see things as Lynn has shared
Well,
here, and
yeah.
some of
Mhm,
the Buddhist things and things like that.
mhm.
Choosing to share, to see life from a positive
Right,
perspective.
right. I think we need to acknowledge, "Hey, that sucks," right?
Right.
Because again, if we're ignoring that it was bad, then, but then we do choose, "Okay, how am I going to deal with this?" And sometimes it's, we do get cranky and grumpy, and I have people that tell me, "Oh, you're always so happy." I'm like, "Yeah, just ask my husband." You know, but yeah, we do all of that. It's part of life. But we can choose, are we going to be the sad sack, or are we going to, be happy? Now, we're not wanting to be Pollyanna, right? Which is ignoring that there's something bad going on, but we don't have to let it bring us down. I tell people, I don't watch the news. I know what's going on in the world, but I don't need to be so caught up into it that that's all I think about. And I figure if something big happens, somebody will tell me. But yeah, it's just I can go along and not have to deal with all of that. I know it's there. I know that, now it's what's going to happen is going to happen, and so I'm going to continue to live my life the way it is. But it is a choice as to how we're doing that. But it does bring me, I have a question about the choice you made for your company name. So you say your company is Unicorn Publishing Company, and you are a unicorn ghostwriter. Now I tell people I'm a unicorn because I'm a blue-eyed redhead, which is less than 1% of the population. And so that makes me a unicorn. But tell us why you named your company that.
So I named my company that because I am one of the few writers that can write up to 10,000 words a day. So
Wow.
most writers write between two, maybe five on a good day, and I can write
Mhm,
up to 10
mhm,
when I get in that flow state, which is pretty often. I've actually crafted my writing skills. I can just literally sit down and write and write and write. I mean, I've written one time I was on a cruise and it was a transatlantic cruise. So we had like 4 or 5 days at sea. And those
mhm,
5 days
mhm,
at sea, I actually rewrote a second edition of my book. I put it on a Word document, took it off
mhm,
of Google. And so I can write really fast, which a lot of other ghostwriters can't put
mhm,
out content that
mhm,
fast. So that's why I call myself
mhm.
the unicorn ghostwriter.
I love it. Very cool.
Thank
That's
you.
Matt, and also what there's a little bit of magic with that. That's my granddaughters. That's their thing. They got unicorns over their rooms and
Mhm,
stuffed animals, and they just think it's
mhm,
magic. So there,
mhm.
there, there you go. Let's talk for a minute.
Here's my unicorn right here. I brought back from Germany
Oh,
last
there you
December.
go. That's got to be your thing, right? My granddaughters would
Yep.
would love that. I want to go take you to something else you shared with me in another conversation we had that I think I would like to at least touch on here because you mentioned how you had really, to say the least, a challenging environment growing up with your parents, and yet in one point in life you spent some time as a caretaker for both of them, or at least in some role, as they both
Mm.
suffer from cancer. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience and how that sorted itself out?
Yeah, so my mom first got diagnosed with breast cancer, and she came home and said she had breast cancer, and she never led a healthy lifestyle. Like she was morbidly obese, she ate unhealthy food, she never exercised. She would literally come home from work and sit for 8 hours in the chair and just watch TV. That was not me. I was like an athletic kid. I played soccer, I did dance growing up, so I was always moving. And I think part of that probably was just getting out of my house because I try to avoid my house as much as
Mhm,
possible.
mhm,
But the other part of that is all of that exercise and movement feels good. Like it helps you to like get rid of
mhm,
whatever's in your head, right? Like running does that, but I can't
mhm.
run right now because of my back. So I'm hoping to resolve that so I can start running again. But to get back to your question, can you repeat the question, Brad? Sorry, it just fell
Well,
out of my head.
I just knew that you had a challenging life, to say the least, with your mom and
Mhm.
dad, and you ended up being some sort of a caretaker role, and they
Mhm,
both had cancer. And that
Yeah.
not everybody can do that. And I
mhm,
just wonder how you navigated some of that, because a lot of our listeners are dealing with cancer. Maybe they have cancer, or maybe they're a caretaker of someone who
mhm.
has cancer, and sometimes that just puts roles in awkward places. Could you speak to
Yeah.
that?
So growing up, my mom was the abuser, and my dad would physically like hit me a lot, and that was pretty common in the 70s. But I would say he was definitely on the side of abusive. But the role of my dad growing up was he was the one who was protecting my mom. He was not saying anything. He wasn't really helping me. I think he knew something was going on, but he never like said, "Hey, you can't do that," like to my mom, right? So I had that dynamic growing up, and then my mom. So going back, my mom first got cancer, and then my dad came down with cancer. My mom, I believe, was in remission when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And then my dad's went into remission. My mom's came back and she passed away. And then his came back and then he passed away. So they had cancer. They both had cancer. I was taking care of them for about a 6 year time span. I had two, my kids were small at the time. They were about, I think, 5 and 8 when they were first diagnosed. And so my kids were small. I was taking care of them. I'm an only child, so I had no siblings to rely on. My husband at the time was not supportive. And so what I did was enlist the help of all of my friends to take care of them. And at the time, I knew about the physical abuse. I knew about the emotional abuse when I was taking care of them. I didn't know about the sexual abuse until after years after my parents passed away. So I did not even get to engage my mom and say, "Hey, this happened. I just remembered this happened. We need to sit down and have a talk." So that's something I have to deal with as an adult later in life, not being able to talk to my mom about the abuse. So I was taking care of them. I remember this one moment in particular where growing up, like I never ever um like my mom didn't hug me. She wasn't motherly at all. She was, if you could have an antithesis of a mother, it was my mom. I mean, she was the Italian who couldn't cook too, which is a whole nother story. So, so anyway, I remember one day I was over, and this was when both my parents had cancer at some point, and I was taking care of them, and we actually they had an in-law suite, an apartment above our garage, and so I would just literally walk across the driveway to take care of them. which was really great. Like I didn't have to drive places, like they were right there. So we had a walkie-talkie in between our houses, a walkie-talkie system. So if they needed anything, they could just hit the walkie-talkie. And at that time I was a stay-at-home mom and I was going to school full time to get my bachelor's degree. So I was not specifically working outside of the house. I did have class though, and I had homework and things like that. So anyway, I remember this one day I went over and I made them dinner. I made sure they had everything. And I was literally, it's like one of those, I call them slow motion moments. So like you never forget it. And I'm walking over. I remember reaching my hand over and smelling the dinner in the background. And I was just about to turn the doorknob to their door to walk out of their apartment. And my mom says, "Lynn, I love you." And I stopped. And I was just like, I literally think that was the only time in my entire life I ever heard my mother tell me she loved me. And that was a
Mm.
week before she died.
Wow. Wow.
I think what's incredible is that you even took care of them. Many people would have said, "You're on your own."
Yeah.
And so the fact that you did that shows how strong you are. I mentioned, excuse me, that my mother passed away last year. Now she was very healthy for the most part until like she was fine one day and gone the next. But I also knew that if and when the time came to be a caregiver, that was not going to work for she and I.
Mm-hmm.
We could do 5 days together at Christmas, and that was about the most we could do. But and so that was going to be a challenge to have to figure. Now she had other people who could care for her, and certainly we could have had people come in and things like that. But it was and there's part of me that thinks, why couldn't I do that? But for both of our own sanity, I knew it would not have worked.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's amazing and incredible, and it really does show your strength of character that you could take care of them.
I
Yeah, I
think.
mean, it was definitely wasn't easy. Yeah, it definitely
Mm.
wasn't easy.
Mhm.
And the part of that is too, is I knew if I didn't take care of them, nobody would.
Mhm.
And I didn't want my children to see that too.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna do it because there's no one else available to do it. And I
Mhm.
took the responsibility on myself. And again, at the time I didn't know about the sexual abuse part. And I
Mhm.
think the dynamic would have been a lot different had I known
Mhm.
that too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
But in any case, you gave your mom and your dad a gift, and then your
Mhm.
mom gave you a gift of saying, "I love you."
Mhm.
And even
Mhm.
though it may have been a long time coming, it is certainly memorable when
Mhm.
it's, as you said, a slow motion moment. And so let's begin the transition, and we'll land the plane here in just a minute here or two. But let's talk about what you do for others. You do for
Hmm.
others. You help them to write. You help them to do process their own stories. Uh, I'd like you to put it in this terms first, and then I'd like you to talk about specifically what you do. Tell us about a person you've worked with who you've helped that you've seen some sort of a transformation or some sort of a cool moment that's happened for somebody that you've worked with that you've helped them to navigate either writing or something like this. Tell me a story that in that
Oh
regard.
wow, there's so many. Just like I guess one recently is that I'm helping one of my clients do a nonfiction book, and she was like literally said like, "There's no way I could have done this without you," because just getting people past the fear of writing books, right, or the fear of like, is my book good enough? Like that's really where my specialty lies. Is not just in the writing, but helping people get past that fear and helping people walking through it with confidence, right? Not just like, oh, I'm publishing this book, but I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm publishing this book and I know this is what I'm doing. This is my plan moving forward. So I love giving people that confidence. And confidence really just comes from the knowledge and wisdom of knowing what you're doing is what the next right journey is. It may not be the next right step for someone else, but it's the right step for you. And so knowing that you're taking that right step and you're confident in that step is really what I love to give people.
Good. Well, then tell us a little bit more. You've told us that transformation story. Tell us a little bit more about if somebody wanted to work with you or learn more about your company and the things that you are all about. Tell us about how that would work and how they might make a connection with you and learn a little bit more about what you offer.
Yeah, so they can go to my website, which is www.writeforyou.me. So it's not .com, it's .me. So it's WRITE. FORYOU.me. And so if you go there, you can hit me up on my contact form. I also have a discovery call link there. So you can click on that and then you can get a free complimentary discovery call to see if we're a good fit. Because I tell everybody, whatever ghostwriter you choose, make sure you're a good personality fit because they're going to be your best friend for the next year.
I
There you
love it.
go.
I
There
love it.
you go.
And you do just primarily nonfiction, right?
Yep, I write all nonfiction, and also I do some poetry too. So if anybody has a book of poems, I'm actually talking to someone right now who has a poetry book that I may
Okay.
be working with.
Well,
Wonderful.
awesome. Awesome. Well, Deb, anything else you want to share or ask about before we
No, I like I said, I'm just incredibly impressed with everything that you have gone through and come out of it as a unicorn. And maybe that's it too, is those unicorns are those bright, shining examples to everybody of magic, right? Like Brad was saying about his granddaughters, and so yeah, just very impressed with everything. Can't wait to hopefully I'll be at Pod Fest next year and see you again.
there
Oh,
you go.
absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you with us again. One of the things I'll just share with you is that something important quality that I look for in people and try to share myself is authenticity, and it's a term that gets thrown around quite a bit these days, but it's real, and people being authentic. And certainly, Lynn Elikqitie Smargis is a incredibly genuine and authentic person, and I know here today and other ways you've shared, from some pretty deep emotional stuff and been a little bit vulnerable. And I just want to say thank you for doing that and for sharing it with our cancer and comedy audience, because we like to offer hope. Is we have two elements that really are important to us: hope and humor. Hope with humor, and that's what you bring to us. But just want to we'll put all the contacts and all the websites and so on and all the links in our website, cancerandcomedy.com. And we just thank you for being our guest today. Her name, Lynn Elikqitie Smargis, from Write For You .me and Unicorn Publishing. Thank you for being our guest today on Cancer Comedy. Deb?
Thanks for
Well,
having me
lifter
on.
uppers. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Well, lifter uppers, this brings us to the close of this episode of Cancer and Comedy Podcast with Dr. Brad Miller. Cancer and Comedy is all about telling uplifting stories of people like you who are kicking cancer's butt with healing through hope and humor. You can join those of us who are turning the grim into a grin by telling us your uplifting stories. Just go to cancerandcomedy.com/voice message. Well, that's it for now. Please join us next time on Cancer and Comedy. And if you like what you hear, please pass this podcast on to someone in your life who needs to turn their grim into a grin. For Dr. Brad Miller, I'm Deb Krier, reminding you that a cheerful heart is good medicine.
And everybody's